Imagine being completely alone in the world's largest desert, with the sun burning your skin, water running out, and a sandstorm closing in. One wrong step could mean death. This is the story of a traveler who faced the Sahara's fury and survived against all odds. The traveler had always dreamed of silence, not the kind that you find in libraries or late-night city streets, but the kind of silence so vast it could swallow you whole. That's what drew him to the Sahara. People had warned him, locals, guides, even a few desert nomads who laughed when he mentioned traveling alone. One old man at a cafe had leaned across the table, his wrinkled hands gripping a chipped cup of tea. "Son," he said in a low voice, "the Sahara is not just sand. It is alive. It is hunger. It will take everything you bring and ask for more. Don't go in without respect." The traveler smiled politely as if he understood, but deep down he believed his preparation would be enough. He had maps, a compass, a canteen full of water, and a stubborn will. He wanted to test himself against nature, to walk across a stretch of the desert that most tourists never dared. That morning, before stepping onto the dunes, he scribbled in his notebook, "This is it, the place where the earth and the sky meet and nothing stands in between. Just me, the sand, and the sun." The first steps felt almost easy. The sand was cool from the night, shifting softly beneath his boots. The horizon stretched endlessly, glowing under the early light. The desert looked almost welcoming, like a golden ocean frozen in waves. He pulled his scarf tighter over his head to block the first rays of heat and walked with a steady rhythm. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Sweat ran down his back, soaking his shirt. Still he felt exhilarated. He paused at the top of a dune, breathing heavily, and turned in a slow circle. The world was empty. No towns, no people, not even the sound of an engine or a bird. Just the wind brushing over the sand, whispering secrets older than history itself. He raised his canteen, drinking deeply. Cool water slid down his throat, refreshing, almost sweet. He wiped his mouth and whispered to himself with a half smile, "Piece of cake. I can handle this." But even as he said it, he noticed something unsettling. The desert had no landmarks. Every dune looked like the next. The horizon was a blur of heat and distance, and his footprints trailed behind him like fragile lines drawn in the sand, already fading under the wind. Still, he pressed on. His boots sank with each step and the golden silence wrapped around him tighter. He thought back to the old man's warning. The Sahara is alive. At the time, he thought it was just superstition. Now, standing in the middle of this endless ocean of dunes, he wasn't so sure. And the desert was only just beginning to show him who was in control. By midday, the desert had shed its morning gentleness. The cool sand of dawn turned scorching and every step sank deeper, dragging at his legs like quicksand. The sun hung above him, a burning white disk in a cloudless sky, pressing down on his shoulders with a weight that grew heavier by the hour. At first, he tried to keep track of his progress by counting dunes. 1, 2, 3. Then he lost count. They all looked the same. Endless curves of golden waves rolling into the horizon. Landmarks that looked near enough to touch revealed themselves to be miles away. It was the desert's cruel trick. Bending, distance, turning hope into mirages. He stopped at the crest of a high dune, panting, sweat dripping from his forehead into his eyes. He raised the canteen and tipped it. The stream of water was lighter than before. The sound of it sloshing inside wasn't as comforting. "Still fine," he muttered, forcing a smile. His voice cracked in the empty silence. "Plenty left. Just don't overdo it." But as he swallowed, he realized something. His lips were already dry again. The water did little more than tease his thirst. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against his scarf, making the sand hiss at his feet. He paused and looked around. There was a strange restlessness in the air. The dunes whispered as though the desert was shifting, preparing something. A memory flashed in his mind. The old man at the cafe. The Sahara is alive. It is hunger, For the first time since starting the journey, he felt a twinge of unease. He took a deep breath, straightened his scarf, and pressed forward. The desert was silent but not peaceful. It was watching, waiting. It began like a shadow on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a mirage again, just heat shimmering off the dunes. But as he watched, the shadow grew darker, heavier, stretching across the sky. The horizon itself seemed to rise up and swell into the air. Then came the sound. A low rumble like distant thunder growing louder with every heartbeat. His stomach clenched. This was no mirage. No, 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 he whispered, his words snatched away by the growing wind. Within minutes, the world changed. A wall of sand, taller than buildings, wide as a mountain, raced toward him with unstoppable force. He wrapped his scarf tight across his face, dropped to his knees, and buried his head against his backpack. The storm hit. The roar swallowed everything. Sand slashed against his skin like knives, biting into every exposed patch of flesh. The air turned solid with grit. He tried to breathe, but sand filled his mouth, his nose, his ears. He coughed, choking, every gasp dragging more dust inside. "Don't panic," he shouted inside his head. "Just hold on, just hold on." Time lost all meaning. Minutes felt like hours. The sky disappeared. The desert disappeared. There was only the endless scream of wind and the suffocating grip of sand. At some point, he realized he was shaking. His hands clenched so tightly they cramped. When the storm finally eased, it left behind a silence far more terrifying than the noise. He lifted his head slowly. The world around him was unrecognizable. The dunes had shifted, his tracks erased. There was no sign of where he had come from. Every direction was just sand, and for the first time he knew he was lost. The morning after the storm was merciless. The sky was clear again, washed clean as if nothing had happened. But for him, everything had changed. He pulled out his canteen, shaking it lightly. The sound inside made his stomach drop. Just a faint splash, a cruel whisper of what was once his lifeline. He tilted it, taking a cautious sip, letting the last drop slide over his tongue. The water was warm, almost bitter, but his throat welcomed it greedily. When he lowered the canteen, it was nearly empty. A dry laugh escaped his cracked lips. "That's it? That's all?" His voice sounded foreign, rasping and weak. The heat was rising fast. By midday, the sand burned so fiercely that even through his boots, his feet ached as though walking on fire. He tried to pace himself, moving slowly, conserving energy, but every step felt heavier than the last. Sweat no longer ran down his face. His body was too dry. His skin burned, his lips peeled, and his tongue swelled inside his mouth, filling it like a stone. He tried not to think of water, but his mind betrayed him. Clear rivers, cold fountains, ice cubes clinking in glasses. He imagined biting into a slice of watermelon juice running down his chin. He shook his head violently, pressing his hands against his temples. "Stop! Stop it!" he growled, staggering forward. By the time the sun stood directly above him, his vision blurred. Strange shapes appeared on the horizon, tall green palms, shimmering pools of blue. An oasis. He gasped and stumbled toward it, his legs trembling. The closer he came, the clearer it looked. He could almost hear the water lapping against the edge of the pool, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Yes. Yes. I made it," he whispered hoarsely. But when he reached the spot, his knees buckled into hot, dry sand. Nothing. Just another dune. The oasis dissolved into thin air, leaving him staring at emptiness. His chest tightened with despair, a scream rising inside. Him, but all that came out was a rasp of air. He dropped to his side, curling up under the weak shadow of his backpack. His throat burned with every swallow, but there was nothing left to swallow. His body trembled, and his thoughts drifted between reality and dream. At some point, he thought he heard voices, faint, distant. A woman calling his name. He smiled, weakly. "Home. I'm home." He reached out, fingers clawing the sand as though touching a loved one's hand. But when he blinked, the vision was gone. Only silence, only desert. Somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark still flickered. He forced himself to sit up, wiping grit from his eyes. His voice cracked as he whispered to himself, "If I stay here, I die. If I move, maybe I live." He strapped his backpack tighter, pulled his scarf higher, and forced his body to stand. His legs shook, his knees threatened to give, but he began to walk again. Step after step. The Sahara wasn't just attacking his body anymore. It was attacking his mind. And the deadliest weapon it had wasn't the heat or the sand, it was thirst. The desert wanted him to quit. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, every bone begged him to lie down and let the sand bury him quietly. But something inside him, something stubborn, almost primal, refused to give up. He dragged one foot forward, then another. His breaths came in sharp gasps, each one cutting his chest like broken glass. The sun had turned the dunes into molten waves, shimmering like gold fire, and he was a lone figure crawling through it. His scarf was crusted with dried saliva. His lips cracked open into painful lines. He mumbled to himself as he staggered. One more step. Just one more step. The words weren't encouragement anymore. They were orders, commands from the last piece of his mind that still wanted to live. Hours passed like lifetimes. At one point he thought he saw bird tracks in the sand, faint, delicate marks leading toward the horizon. His heart pounded. Birds meant life. Life meant water. He followed the tracks, his legs trembling, every movement mechanical. But as the sun began to sink, another challenge came. His body could no longer hold him upright. He fell to his knees, then to his hands, the sand scalding against his skin. His vision blurred again. Shadows twisted in the heat, forming figures that weren't there. A crowd seemed to stand in the distance, waving him forward. He reached out, tears burning in his eyes, but the figures dissolved. "Please," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, I'm not like this." And then something happened. Far ahead, at the very edge of the fading light, he saw a shape that didn't dissolve. A cluster of low, dark figures against the horizon. He blinked, rubbed his eyes with trembling hands. The shape stayed. He squinted harder. They were tense, real tense. And faintly, he could see smoke curling into the sky. His heart exploded with hope. His body, however, refused to obey. His legs buckled under him, and he collapsed, face first into the sand. The world tilted, darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. "No, not now," he muttered, clawing at the ground, dragging himself forward inch by inch. His nails filled with grit, his arms trembled violently, but he kept going. The sound of voices reached him then. Real voices, deep, steady, carried on the wind. He raised his head, and through the blur he saw figures approaching. Men dressed in flowing robes, faces covered against the sand. Nomads. One of them shouted something in a language he didn't understand. Another rushed to his side, kneeling, lifting his head gently. He felt cool water touch his lips, not in gulps but in precious drops. He tried to drink too fast, but the man pulled the flask back, shaking his head. Slowly, carefully, they gave him more, their voices calm, steady, reassuring. The traveler's eyes filled with tears as he realized he was saved. Against the fury of the desert, against the thirst and the storms, against his own fading body, he had made it. Not by strength alone, not by defiance, but by sheer refusal to give in. And the Sahara, for reasons he would never understand, had let him live. When he opened his eyes again, the world was different. The ceiling above him wasn't sky, but canvas, a nomad's tent. The air smelled of smoke and spices, and the low murmur of voices drifted through the walls. He blinked, confused, until the memories came rushing back. The sandstorm, the thirst, the hallucinations, the long crawl toward the tents. A hand lifted the flap, and one of the nomads stepped inside. His face was weathered, lined by the sun and wind, but his eyes were kind. In his hand he held a small clay cup filled with water, He knelt beside the traveler and offered it gently. "Slow," the man said in broken English, holding up a finger. "Sip. Not fast." The traveler's hands trembled as he lifted the cup. He let a single mouthful of cool water rest on his tongue before swallowing. It was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. The water seemed to soak through every corner of his being as if life itself was flowing back into him. Tears welled in his eyes, and he whispered hoarsely, "Thank you." For 2 days, they nursed him back. Water came in careful drops, food in small portions, flatbread, dates, a bit of warm goat's milk. He lay in their care, listening to the desert winds outside the tent, realizing just how close he had come to becoming one more skeleton lost in the sands. When he was finally strong enough to sit, he stepped outside the tent. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, calm and golden, as if it hadn't tried to kill him just days before. Children played nearby, chasing each other across the dunes. A woman stirred a pot over a fire. Life carried on here, not in defiance of the Sahara, but in harmony with it. He thought back to the old man at the cafe, the one who had warned him. The Sahara is alive. It is hunger. The words rang true now, but with something added. The desert was not only hunger, it was also wisdom. A teacher. It didn't care for pride or plans, but it revealed truths you could never learn anywhere else. He had entered the desert seeking silence. He found it. But it was not the peaceful silence he imagined. It was the silence that strips away everything unnecessary, leaving you face to face with yourself. Alone, fragile, and mortal, as I. The nomads prepared to guide him back to safety. He turned for one last look at the dunes. The golden waves shimmered in the sunlight, beautiful and terrible at once. He knew then that the desert didn't hate him, nor did it spare him out of kindness. It simply was. Vast, eternal, indifferent. But he also knew this. He had faced it, walked the edge of death and come back alive. That knowledge was more valuable than gold, more powerful than pride. It was a reminder that life is fragile, and survival in the end is a choice. He smiled faintly and whispered almost to himself, "The Sahara doesn't forgive easily, but it let me walk away with a story." And with that, he followed the nomads out, leaving his footprints in the sand, footprints the desert would soon erase, but a story it could never silence. The Sahara doesn't forgive easily. It tested him with thirst, storms, and the endless silence of the dunes. But he survived, not by luck, but by sheer will. Today he walks away with scars, lessons, and a story that proves, even in the harshest deserts, the human spirit can endure. And one day those footprints in the sand may vanish, but the story will never be forgotten.